Welcome to this episode of Mondays in Midtown. I'm your host, Willie McKenna. On this episode, we have a GIC speaker, Professor Morris Kalliny, a political panel, and much more. Stay tuned. And welcome into Mondays in Midtown. We're going to go ahead and start off this episode with our GIC speaker from last week. Our very own Amanda Huntingford sat down with Cal Thomas and Bob Beckel, columnists from USA Today, as they talked about bipartisanship. Let's take a look at that interview.
You're talking about the partisan divide, correct? We've all heard so many stories about how far gone the system is. How much hope do you see for healing this partisan divide?
I think it depends a lot on individuals. One of the things that Bob and I try to do with our program is to show how people who come from vastly different political perspectives can be friends, build relationships, and put solutions and the country ahead of partisan political advantage. We have experienced, as we've done this around the country, a number of people who have told us that they were starting their own little common ground chapters and trying to do something at the local level. That's very, very encouraging. I think if you wait for it to happen in Washington, you're going to wait until you have a gray beard. It's just not going to happen. But we think that it can happen if it starts at the grassroots, and then we might have something to bubble up.
The only way it's going to work ultimately is that politicians who don't practice common ground are going to get punished for it. Right now they get rewarded because they're partisan polarizers, and they've got this base on the right or the left, and if they don't stick to the line, they get punished. So what they do is get encouraged and funded, and they get votes for being partisan politicizers, polarizers rather. And our view is that as soon as we can get this translated into votes, because most people are tired of it. Most people can't stand politics, and for good reason. I've been around it for 30 years. I've never seen it worse. Because both the Republican caucuses move so far to the right with the Tea people, and the Democrats move so far to the left, that you're never going to find common ground unless the people demand it, or unless they vote people into office who are more conducive to common ground. And that's the only way it's going to happen. Or conversely, the country falls apart and they have to do something about it.
Is there an issue that's prevalent in politics today that you think has the most hope of fostering bridges and helping the parties work together better?
Well, I don't know if there's any one issue, but I do think that I think Bob is absolutely right. If politicians start getting punished for not doing what they ought to be doing anyway, then they're going to wake up in a hurry. It's not about compromising your principles. It's about putting the country first. The interesting thing about this is if the voters sense that the country is being put ahead of the politician's own career and interest, it has the best opportunity of extending the careers of those politicians. So it works in almost the opposite way. The reason people are so cynical about Congress with its approval rating, no matter who's in the majority, by the way, at such a low level, even in single digits, is because they don't believe that they truly represent the people.
You know, I think the thing that's going to drive them finally to do it is when Social Security goes broke or Medicare goes broke, and all of a sudden they've got 15,000 screaming senior citizens at their front door. They'll pay some attention then. Right now it's been put off because of a series of accounting tricks. Eventually it's going to have to come home to roost, and they're going to have to deal with it. And so far both sides, and my side's been the worst. I mean, every time we've decided that we're behind, we scare every old person we can with Social Security. Social Security's going to be gone if you don't vote Democratic. And the Republicans shy away from it. They don't want to deal with it. I mean, here you got a guy, Paul Ryan, who I think his plan is ridiculous, but nonetheless, he at least had the courage to put it out. And Mitt Romney, his, the head of his ticket, tells him not to say anything about it. Why? Because it's too controversial. Well, at some point, they're going to have to come to grips with it because somebody's got to end up paying it.
Yeah, and the Democratic response, I think, was equally silly. You had this Paul Ryan look-alike, an actor, pushing an old lady in a wheelchair over a cliff. Now, Bob is right. I mean, this was at least a serious proposal. And it seems to me that that could have been a starting point. Fix the things that you think need fixing, agree on what you can agree on, disagree on what you have to disagree on, and pass something, because everybody knows with a $16 trillion debt, we cannot go on like this forever, and entitlements are the biggest driving force behind the debt.
And I thought that ad with that old lady being pushed off the cliff was just terrible. If it were up to me, I'd have put Ryan in the chair and have him pushed over the edge of the cliff.
Very tolerant of you.
Yeah, very tolerant, yeah. Look, you know, the Republicans have refused to sit down. Here's the problem with the Republicans. They say no taxes, none. Well, it used to be there were Republicans around who found some agreement on taxes, on some revenue, cutting spending. You have to have both. You can't do it one way. You know, and they keep complaining that there's so much in taxes. Well, the fact of the matter is very little of the taxes that are spent on that part of the budget they keep saying they don't like. Planned Parenthood, the Peace Corps, go on. That represents a minuscule part of the budget. The rest of it is in defense, which is bloated. You know, we spend more money in defense every year than the entire world combined. And they keep saying they want more money. For what? And I mean, and the idea that we're going around the world fighting everybody's wars for them, paying the bill, nobody's willing to pay the bill on the other side, and then we don't even get a thank you. I mean, we liberated the Iraqis, we killed Hussein, and what happens? They turn around and shoot us, and they give their oil concessions to the Russians and the Chinese. What's that all about?
Yeah, this is one issue that Bob and I feel very strongly about and agree on. We need to have a serious discussion, even a debate, on America's role in the world. John Kennedy said in his 1961 inaugural address that we'll pay any price and bear any burden in the defense of liberty. Now that was then, that was over 50 years ago, and it was a very, very noble sentiment at a time when the United States was fighting the Soviet Union in the Cold War for hegemony in various parts of the world. But the world has changed significantly since then. And Bob is absolutely right. I mean, I don't want to sound like George McGovern, but he was right when he said about the Vietnam War in 1971, we cannot be the policeman of the world, or at least we can't pay for it all. So I think we really need a discussion about where American values are challenged or threatened. Then maybe we can go there with various forces, but at the very least, we should expect those people we're helping to pay part of the bill.
And you know, the other thing is, you look at the Mideast now and these riots taking place outside the U.S. Embassy. First of all, I don't believe for a second that it was not touched off by this idiot who put this film together that incited the Muslims, but something else would have incited them. Let's face it, they don't like Americans. They never have liked Americans. But George Bush pushed very much during his term about democracy in the Mideast. Let's let them vote. And then there was the Arab Spring, and they got rid of all these dictators who are horrendous people. And they voted. And in Egypt, they voted in the Muslim Brotherhood, and all of a sudden we don't like it. Well, that's democracy. They voted them in, and you may not like what the outcome is, but that's what democracy is all about. I mean, the Republicans get elected, they elect Tea Party people to the House. I can't stand that, but I have to put up with it. You know, so, I mean, it's going to take a while for democracy to work its way into what democracy means in the Middle East. And it's not for us to go in after we've encouraged democracy and say, oh, by the way, we wish Mubarak was back. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. It is what it is. And if it means that you're going to have people who are going to protest outside U.S. embassies, and that's different and apart from killing a U.S. ambassador. That was a terrorist attack. It had nothing to do with these protests. Despite what the Obama administration said. It is clearly, in my mind, it was a terrorist attack. But there could be more of those. And it was also on 9/11, a little convenient, don't you think? But, you know, there have been years of oppression by dictators in the Middle East that the United States has supported over and over again, and you wonder why these people don't like us. Well, they don't like us. So maybe it's time for us to stop fighting their wars, continue diplomatic relations, maybe some foreign aid, and don't leave the avenue open for the Russians and the Chinese to fill it in. But it is not our responsibility to fight every battle in the Middle East.
So what do you think is the best way for civilians to foster this discussion on our place in the world and keep it rolling, keep it going, and help a consensus be found?
Well, we have great universities in this country, and they ought to be about more than just teaching the next generation. They should also serve as hosts for some of these forums. I think we need a series of forums in all parts of the country, where we can bring people with experience together. Because after all, it's the older people who start the wars, but it's the younger people who have to fight them. So it seems to me that there ought to be an interest across generational lines in what it is we're doing in the world, not only in blood and lives, but also in treasure. Wars cost a lot of money, and the money that's spent is money that is being taken from your generation. So I think young people, middle-aged people, older people have an interest in this. And now is a great time to do it. The Soviet Union is no more, although Russia has some problems. China is rising. We're going to have to address that issue differently from the Soviet Union, I think. And I think now would be a good time to have a discussion. I think university campuses, properly balanced with ideas from all sides, would be an excellent place to start. Put it on C-SPAN, let the country participate.
Yeah, let me add on to that. Any professor in this university that teaches any course that has anything to do with the Mideast or history who does not engage this conversation ought to be fired. Because it is something that is so much more important than what happened in the Byzantine Empire in 325. What's going on right now is critical to the survival of the world. You've got 1.5 billion Muslims. And if we're not talking about that here and now, and we don't have professors talking about it here and now, tell them to take their syllabuses, rip them up, and get about the business of dealing with what's going on now in the world. And you'd have a much better environment for learning.
So you are.
And there you go, professors. I'm glad you're happy to hear that.
So you are at university tonight. What is the message that you are hoping that students come away from your presentation with?
Well, I think one of the things that concerns me is that we tend to label people early. Right wing, left wing, Republican, Democrat, secular humanist, religious fanatic. And we pigeonhole people based on the label we put on them. We may not know the true meaning of the label. We may not know if it adequately applies to them. I mean, for example, you say somebody is a Catholic. Well, there are many different kinds of Catholics and many different sorts of beliefs within the Catholic Church and even outside Catholic teaching. So you haven't really told me anything if you tell me you're a Catholic. Well, what kind? What do you believe? So I think this all comes out of a failure of relationships. We're all into Twitter and Facebook now and all the social media, which is fine and has its place. But people don't talk to each other anymore. I mean, really talk to each other. I don't consider a tweet a conversation. I mean, sit down and spend some time with somebody, especially somebody you may not agree with. Bob is very good on this. He'll say this tonight, I suspect. Sit down with somebody you disagree with and listen to them. Find out where they came from, not just physically, but where they came from ideologically. And then they'll listen to you. This is the unique quality of America. Very few countries allow this sort of thing. And then, you'll find out some areas of agreement. Maybe you'll have still some areas of disagreement, but you'll have built a bridge. That's what we'd like to lead to.
You know the thing that surprises us, doesn't surprise us, we see it every day. The people who want to reinforce their own philosophies go to the blogs that reinforce their philosophies. They never look at other blogs. The danger of blogs is they have no filter, no editorial content. A lot of them outrageously wrong. And that there ought to be a place where you can go and get at least difference of opinion and not just get yourself sided with your left or right and say that's the gospel, because it's not. And in a situation like universities today, there needs to be, like, for example, I mean, I'm glad we're at a Catholic university. I have a great deal of faith in the Catholic education, although when I was in public school, I used to have to eat fish sticks every Friday, which I've never given up on disliking the Catholics about that. But nonetheless, I'll let that go because I'm glad to be here. But on a serious note, there has got to be a rigorous, serious debate, including both sides. I'm tired of having to go on television every day and having my colleagues say, all there are a bunch of left-wing professors at these colleges. A, that's not true, but B, it ought to be the case that whenever you're having a discussion of this magnitude, like what's going on in the Mideast, you ought to have both sides represented and let students hear both sides of it and not just have one point of view. And that's why the two of us can get together and talk out a point of view where we have decidedly different political philosophies. His is wrong and mine's right. And
No, you're left.
Oh, I'm left. That's right. You're right. But we can find areas of common ground, and if we can do it, anybody can do it.
That's for
There's
sure.
no excuse for it. There's absolutely no excuse for it, except people want to get a bunch of money. That's what it is. I mean, politics become a payoff system. They pay the people who put the most money in are buying these congressional seats, and it's a sham. And we don't mind saying it now. I mean, I've already cashed out on my campaign, so it doesn't matter. But you know, you see these super committees and the things that are going on now, the amount of money that's infiltrating this system, just to protect what? To protect the status quo. And the status quo works for a lot of people, and that's what they want.
Thank you for that great look at the GIC speakers. Get a little bit more of an in-depth look into the actual personalities of Bob, Beckel, and Cal Thomas. Coming up next, we're going to go ahead and take a look at SLU's very own Professor Morris Kalliny, as he's a marketing teacher here at the John Cook School of Business. He talked a little bit about the cultural difference between the Middle East and the United States, and he also talked about the recent protests and riots in his hometown of Cairo, Egypt. Let's go ahead and take a look at that interview.
Basically, you have to look at the content of the video, and the video is although it's very, very poorly made, it basically looks at some aspects that are very holy to the Islamic faith and makes fun of those. And in order for us to really understand why people react the way they do in terms of their culture, their religion, or their customs, we need to understand that culture basically, I mean, the easiest way for me to explain this is I look at culture and I say in every culture there is a foundation. Okay, so if we can imagine culture to be like a pyramid, with each culture has three sides. The bottom side is the foundation of each culture. So if we look at the American culture, for example, we can say civil liberties or freedom basically is really one of the main foundations of this country. You touch that or you shake it in any way, and then people become very emotional, and even they become, to a certain extent, irrational. Okay, now I don't make a comparison to how we behave in this country to the way they behaved in the Middle East as a response to the movie, but nonetheless. So the main foundation for the Islamic culture is basically religion. Okay, you touch that foundation, you shake it in any way, or you make fun of it, and then people become very intolerant, become very emotional, because you have touched something that is ingrained in their core of their identity, basically. In other words, if you were to take somebody who is even a Christian, okay, in the Middle East, and you say, okay, today, give up your religion, who would you become? It'd be extremely difficult for them to really explain to you who would they become without that aspect of the religion. That goes for the Christians and the Muslims. And the reason for that is because the Middle East is very ingrained in that part of the culture. Also, we have to understand that there are two things that are extremely holy in the Islamic faith, Islamic religion, and that is God and Prophet Muhammad. Okay, if you were to insult God, for example, now it's illegal to do so, but if you were to insult God and you're outside the Middle East, you might actually get away with it. And the reason for that is because God is shared between all major religions. So, the Christians say, we share God with the Muslims, and so is the Judaism. But the one aspect that is very unique to the Muslim faith is their prophet, and that is Prophet Muhammad. So when you basically attack that figurehead of the religion, then basically you are attacking something that is very special just to them, and they feel it's a personal attack on themselves as well, and that's why they would react the way we saw in the last few weeks or days.
Another aspect of the culture that I believe people don't tend to understand is the idea of honor killings. They look at them and they just can't fathom that idea. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that might happen there.
Sure. Basically, we've got some theories in culture that could help us explain why that might be the case. Now, so for example, in the American culture is very individualistic, where basically we believe that each person is responsible for their actions and their behaviors. So we hold them responsible for what they do. It wouldn't be reasonable for somebody, for example, to hold a brother or a sister liable for the way their siblings behave. Now, that's not the case in the Middle East and in those cultures where they practice honor killing. So the idea is what people do, because they belong to a group, what they do not only will reflect on themselves, but also by default reflects on the family. So for example, if you look at Egypt, if a female were to go and let's say engage in premarital sex, for example, and gets pregnant and becomes known among the local community of that family, then it's going to be extremely difficult for that family to overcome the shame that will be attached to the family because of that behavior. Now, the shame is not going to be attached to only that person that was engaged in the behavior or the act. It's going to also be attached to almost every single family member of that family. So, and that can go on for a very, very long time, for years and years and years. So the dealings of people with this family will be determined by those actions. So society might actually see this to be unfair. So if somebody has a sister and she goes and she engaged in this, then the reaction would become, well, why do I have to put up with those actions? Why do I have to live up with this shame, for the rest of my life because my sister was engaged in something like this? So the cop-out for that problem is basically eliminate that member of the family. So the example that I give for this, like almost you've got, and it's a very trivial example, but I think it does put the point across, is if you have a box of apples, for example, and one apple basically goes bad. The idea is if that apple were to remain in the box, then eventually the entire box is going to go bad as well. So the justification that people have for the honor killing is that you're saving the family's name by eliminating one member or one branch that has gone bad in their perspective. And also because, sex is such a taboo aspect of life in the Middle East, it also exacerbates the problem. It makes it much, much bigger. It's almost like make it, the sin that nobody can forget or forgive. So that also adds to the problem as well.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other aspects of the culture in the Middle East that you think it's very important for citizens of the United States to know and to understand?
I think it's important for us to really understand that cultural differences are real, and we may not agree with them, and we're not required to agree with them. But nonetheless, acknowledging that there are cultural differences, acknowledging and knowing that they do exist, and we should show some respect wherever possible, I think that would help nations to live hopefully more peacefully with each other. And the other thing that probably that media is not talking about much today is there are actually changes, there are major changes taking place in the Middle East, and those are mainly cultural changes. So if we compare the culture of the Middle East, 10, 15 years ago, before the mass media that came in, and to today, we're going to find it's making major differences. For example, it used to be extremely difficult or uncommon or rare for citizens of those countries to come out and demand their freedoms, for example. Now we have seen in the last 18 months that there's a turning point, 180 degrees, where very, very large numbers in the millions have come out and basically demanded their freedom. So for a very long time, people believed that this is just the culture, this is what was acceptable, yet we see some changes taking place as well. Education, for example, also a major contributor to keeping the same culture intact. Now the Middle East is open to the outside world. Education is becoming one of the priorities in the Middle East. And it used to be, for example, a very small number of females went to college in the Middle East. Now, especially in the poor countries like whether it's in Egypt or Yemen or Syria, those places where they're not rich as the Gulf states like Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. But now there's a trend where they want to make it possible for the majority of the people, females, to actually go and make it to college. Is that going to contribute to changes? I think so, and I've been advocate of the belief that international business, international marketing is going to be the most important and crucial factor in bringing those changes, because people are going to see how people live in the West. They're going to see that there's actually a different culture outside their own, and they may want to borrow some aspects of it, and that's how different cultures they can fuse with each other and form either a new culture or forsake an old aspect of a culture and adopt a new one.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think our viewers, who are primarily students of Bowling, can do to help foster community and build bridges with people of other cultures?
I think it's the most important aspect to use your time as a SLU student to be exposed to either somebody from a different country or a different culture, because you might say, well, I really understand culture awareness, I understand the differences, but unless you're really confronted with those differences, it's not going to make sense to you. You're not going to be able to really understand those differences until you're dealing with them. I went to American schools long before I came to the U.S., and I thought I understood or I knew American culture because I was taught by Americans, for a good number of years. But I did not really understand those cultural differences until I came to the U.S. and I started living in this country, interacting with Americans on a daily basis, and then I knew that those differences, not only they are real, they're very deep ingrained in our mindset. And that's why, when we look at culture, we basically define culture as the software of the mind, which means it's what prompts you to act and react consciously and subconsciously. So being in those situations, I think would help. I would advise the students to take some sort of a course that would expose them to some international aspects of academia, whether it's international business, international marketing, international relations, or any course that would expose them to different cultures and just be aware of that.
Thank you, Professor Kalliny, for that great look at the cultural differences between the Middle East and the United States. Coming up next, we have a political panel. Our very own Amanda Huntingford once again sat down with Amy Lutz and Eric Benna of College Republicans and College Democrats here on the campus of St. Louis University.
So thank you, Amy Lutz and Eric Benna, for joining us this week. Let's start with the Bob Beckel and Cal Thomas speech. What did you two make of the speech and their message?
Well, I thought it was really good. They had a message of working together, bipartisanship, and ending kind of the hyperpolarization that is dominating our politics right now. So
good. I thought it was a great speech. I actually got to catch up with them after the meeting. We ran out, and I met both of them. Both very nice guys. And I think their goal is a good one, to not be so polarized that we can't debate with one another anymore. But the one thing I will say, though, is that there's a difference between a Bob Beckel Democrat and a Cal Thomas Republican, and let's say a Barack Obama Democrat and a Mitt Romney Republican. I get the impression from what I know about their policies that Bob Beckel and Cal Thomas are similar on some things. They've been friends for a long time, and they probably agree on several different issues. So that's why I think it was much easier for them to debate and go back and forth. I think that what they're going for, that they don't want the hyper partisanship in Washington, but it's not going to be as easy, I think, in this presidential season and this the Senate races, the House races, as they portrayed it. But it's still a good goal to strive for.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think you're very right, and I think one of the things Mitt Romney kind of exemplifies, I think, some of the stuff they were talking about as far as hyperpartisanship and dividing us. I think we saw that recently with the 47% comments. I think that's just one example of how this election is so divided and partisan. So,
I mean, I'll disagree with you on that one. Can I rebut that? I think that Mitt Romney actually, in some cases, is one of the least partisan because he used to be a Democrat. He used to be further to the left.
And then he changed his mind.
And then, I do believe that he had a verifiable turning point, at least on some issues. Sure, there are some people who are very partisan in the Republican Party. There's people who are very partisan in the Democratic Party. But along the lines of the 47% comment, I think that the first issue is that Mother Jones edited 2 minutes of it and didn't get the full question in. I think, and from what I've seen, a lot of Republicans are actually in support of what he said. He was not saying that he didn't care about 7% of the people. He was saying he's portraying a message of low taxes. And for the 47 to 49% of people who don't pay income taxes, that's really not going to be something that reaches out to them. So I think the media narrative is really what's dividing us. The media narrative saying that Mitt Romney doesn't care about the 47%. Mitt Romney, doesn't care about veterans and people who get government benefits. I think that's really what's dividing us.
I mean, I think what's divisive is a lot of the rhetoric, especially the rhetoric that Mitt Romney is saying that these people think that they're victims and that they're never going to take responsibility for their lives. That's very charged language, and that's a very big assumption to make that I don't think Mitt Romney knows how I feel about things. How does he know how 47% of Americans feel about their lives and their government? I don't think he does.
So on the track of the presidential elections, we have the first debate this week. What do each of you think that the candidates need to do to be successful in this first debate?
Want to go first? I think that really Mitt Romney needs to come out swinging hard on this. I think that within the Republican Party, I will admit that there are some people who think that maybe he's a little too plasticky on some issues. I mean, that's probably not a word, but that's how I describe it. And I think as a person, Mitt Romney, is very relatable, a good guy, but there's something when he gets behind a camera, he can't relate to people as well. So I think he really needs to come out hard. I think he needs to be persistent on what he says. I think he needs to be clear, shy away from maybe some of the bigger talking points. I think Barack Obama needs to stick to the talking points. I mean, there's not going to be a teleprompter there, but we've seen that, the issues like you didn't build that, and some of the bigger gaffes that he's had have happened when he's off prompter and off script. So I think there's no doubt that Barack Obama is a good, speaker, but it'll be interesting to see the policy debate, as opposed to maybe the persona, the personality debate when it comes to the actual debate this week.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would agree with that. I think Romney really needs to step it up going into this debate. He has had more experience this election cycle with debates because he had a ridiculous amount of debates with the rest of the Republican candidates. But I think Mitt Romney really needs to come out with specifics, because as of right now, the reason that Barack Obama is dominating in the media is because there's no specific, Romney hasn't done a good job articulating specific aspects of his policies. He says, I'm going to revolutionize taxes, I'm going to do this, but there's no specifics. And I think that lack of specificity on policies is what leads to the narrative of his tax returns, of all these other, the 47%, that we have to constantly be talking about all these other things because Mitt Romney is very weak on specific policies and articulating what those specific policies are going to be.
Can I rebut that? Sorry, I'm being argumentative today. I just have to say I agree with you that he hasn't articulated specifics in some ways when he's out on the campaign trail. But the specifics are on his website. They're out there. He has a specific plan. But I think that his goal in this election, as far as the campaign trail so far, has not been to give specifics. It's been to kind of, be the idea guy, be the appeals to, the American dream, American exceptionalism, that kind of thing. And in the debates, I agree with you that he does need to come out with specifics, and I think that that's the venue for it. Maybe not when he's giving these speeches at the big rallies. That's where the ideas aspect comes out. But yeah, he does need to come out with policy ideas just during the debate at least.
And the president, what does the president need to do?
Well, I think President Obama needs to, just come out and also articulate his policies. I mean, I feel he's done better so far on the election campaign trail, articulating what exactly, how his policies have helped so far and how his policies are going to help in the future. I think he needs to hammer on his economic accomplishments so far, creating 4.4 million private sector jobs, investing billions in education, investing in renewable energy and other domestic forms of energy like natural gas, and also the great civil rights achievements that have happened during this administration, the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, as well as the passage of the Lilly Ledbetter Act. I think he needs to run on his record and hammer home what he's going to accomplish in these next 4 years as president.
Well, I tend to think that Barack Obama actually shouldn't run on his record, because when you look at it, he's presided over the slowest economic increase in productivity since, I guess, the Great Depression. I don't know the exact stats of it. And there still are a lot of issues in the economy. Obviously, I think based on his plans, unemployment was supposed to be about 5% or so. It's been 43 months of over 8%. I think that what Barack Obama needs to do, and not necessarily I agree with this, is, divert from this record, focus on Mitt Romney's record, and focus on some of the more social issues that are much more divisive, like the supposed war on women, like the contraception mandate. Because when you really get down to the numbers, I don't think he can go up against Mitt Romney on some of these things.
I mean, I disagree. Romney doesn't necessarily have much of a record to run on. He's shied away from his career in business at Bain after some not so flattering details have come out. And I really think that that Obama does have a record to run on. And there's this talk about how this economic recovery is very slow, and it is slow. But also, what people need to realize is that this is a different economy than ever before. This is a highly globalized economy, and things don't happen overnight. And I mean, if you look at the Reagan administration, conservatives praise Reagan. Reagan, on his election day to his second term in 1984, unemployment was over 7%. Unemployment reached 10.8% during the Reagan administration. So, just because the economy hasn't recovered as fast as people would have liked doesn't mean that he still hasn't accomplished a lot. This has been it was the greatest financial crash and recession since the Great Depression, like you mentioned, and it's not a hole that we're going to get out of in 4 years.
Mm-hmm. So turning to the Senate race, in Missouri, it's been big swing race, big deal across the state, interesting comments and all over the place. Where do you see the election going from now till November?
I think it'll be a very, very close race. I think it's very interesting that a lot of the big Republicans actually have come out in support of Todd Akin now, that he officially will not be out of the race. I know Blunt is one of them. There's word that the Republican Party is going to start pouring money back into Missouri. Newt Gingrich was here just a couple days ago. I really do think that Akin can win. I know his comments, I do not stand by his comments. I think that they were uneducated, they were off the cuff, but we need to remember that we can't blame Akin for a 6-second mistake when Claire McCaskill has had 6 years of mistakes. And for Republicans, Claire McCaskill is, Obama's #1 fan. And I think that that's something we need to remember. We need to remember that the Senate is perhaps even more important than the presidency in some ways. And I really think I've seen a lot of work in the grassroots area of conservatism in Missouri, and it's incredible that the spread is only about 5 points right now. Considering Akin's comments, it should be a lot more. And I think now that Republican money is flowing back into the state, it'll be a very, very close race.
I think one of the reasons that the spread is still fairly close is that all of these Republicans that came out condemning Akin, they're not from Missouri, and Missouri is still where his base is. He's from Missouri. He's lived in Missouri his whole life. He's from Missouri. That's where his base is. That's why he's still popular here. And I just don't foresee him being able to pull this election out. McCaskill's ground game is far better than his. These comments that he's been having to fight off for the past month or so, that has taken away a lot of the momentum that, if he had any momentum to begin with, and especially after a brutal primary here in Missouri. So I think Akin doesn't have much of a chance of pulling it out, especially he's polling very low among Missouri Republican women. I just don't foresee him recovering from those comments he made.
Great. Well, Amy Lutz from College Republicans and Eric Benow from College Democrats, thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions that you would like to hear their take on, send them to mondaysinmidtown@gmail.com, and we will be sure to bring them up on a future panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much to College Republicans and College Democrats, Amy and Eric, for sitting down here on Mondays in Midtown. Coming up next, Professor Meyer sits down and gives us another in-depth look on his weekly segment talking about the news journalism business.
Okay, this is a short but I hope instructive story about a young journalist and her first big story and the importance of both curiosity and a willingness to take chances, but not too many chances. Young woman who used to be the editor of the U News about 20 years ago. She was working in Washington, D.C. on a postgraduate internship. She'd been there maybe most of the summer and was getting some good experience. And then she heard on the police scanner in her little newspaper office that someone had reported to the cops that a pickup truck had parked next to the Washington Monument. Now, this is the summer and there's lots and lots of traffic, lots of people. And she listened closely. She wasn't close enough to see them all, but she's not that far away. And it turned out that they were bringing people out of the mall, and the cops are coming in, and fire trucks are on the road. And she thought, what is going on? And she started listening closer, and it turned out there was a report that a guy had parked a pickup truck that he said was full of dynamite or TNT next to the Washington Monument. He was going to blow it up to protest whatever. Well, everybody started scrambling around the city to cover this. They brought helicopters in, taking pictures from the air. Washington Post had people there. Mary thought, well, I'm going to do this because I got nothing else to do and no one's here. The paper had been put out for the day. She had nothing else to do. So just as a second thought, she grabbed this big expensive camera with a gigantic telescope lens on it and went running to her car and went on down to the mall. She'd been there about 10 or 15 minutes milling around, watching the crowds and watching the cops. And she thought, okay, if I can get a good shot of this crowd, maybe it'll make a great picture later on. And someone noticed her taking a shot. And the cop hollered, hey, you, yeah. And she said, I'm with the press. It's okay, I'm here. He said, no, it's not that. He said, is that your camera? Yeah. Can we use it? And she said, what for? If we can get a picture of that guy's license plate, then we might be able to figure out who he is, because we don't know. We can find his mother, his wife, his girlfriend, somebody to talk him out of this. And he said it could save us lots and lots of trouble and lots of lives. He said, we use your camera. But she took hold of the camera and she said she thought for about 2 seconds, and then she said, if I get an exclusive story, yeah, you can have my camera. And the cop said, come on, girlie, because she's in her 20th. This is an emergency, a police emergency. She said, it's my camera. He said, I'll talk to my boss. He goes running across the crowd somewhere. He comes back. He says, okay, you get an exclusive story. And she holds up her tape recorder and says, say it in the tape recorder on the record so that I know it's going to last. And he rolls his eyes and he says, you get the exclusive story on this. And she said, your name and date. My name is Baba, Officer Baba, and the date. Now give me the goddamn camera. So she gives him the camera, and sure enough, they go over and they take a picture of this guy's license plate. They do track down his relatives using her camera, and she eventually gets it back, and they give her the exclusive story. She writes the exclusive story up. It gets picked up by the Washington Post and lots of papers along New England because it's a big deal. It eventually gets picked up by the Post-Dispatch here because it was a big deal. She's from St. Louis. She went to St. Louis U. I'm working at the Post. She ends up working with me for the next 10 years based on that one exciting moment that she took a chance, and it works. You never know. That's it.
Once again, thank you, Professor Meyer, for that great look week in and week out at the journalism business. That'll just about wrap it up for this episode. But once again, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can email us at mondaysinmidtown@gmail.com, or you can like our Facebook page to watch old episodes and current episodes. For the cast and crew here at Mondays in Midtown, I'm your host, Willie McKenna. Be sure to join us next week.